The desert sun beat down mercilessly on US Route 60, turning the asphalt into a shimmering river of heat waves. Jack Dawson adjusted his worn baseball cap and wiped the sweat from his brow as his 18-wheeler rumbled through the desolate landscape of New Mexico. The radio crackled with static, unable to find a clear station in this god-forsaken stretch of highway. For the past 3 hours, he'd seen nothing but sand, scrub brush, and the occasional roadrunner darting across the scorching pavement. Jack had been driving this route for nearly 15 years, hauling agricultural supplies from Phoenix to small towns scattered across the Southwest. At 42, he knew every mile marker, every truck stop, every shortcut between here and Moriarty. The monotony had become a comfort, a predictable rhythm that kept his mind from wandering to darker places. But today felt different. Today, something in the pit of his stomach whispered that change was coming. The engine of his Peterbilt hummed its familiar song, a mechanical lullaby that had accompanied him through countless lonely nights on the road. His cargo of fertilizer and farming equipment was secure in the trailer behind him, destined for Henderson's feed and supply in Moriarty. It was a routine delivery, one he'd made dozens of times before. Nothing special about it. Nothing to suggest that his life was about to take a sharp turn into uncharted territory. The landscape gradually shifted from pure desert to patches of struggling farmland. Corn stalks wilted in the heat, their leaves brown and brittle despite the irrigation systems that crisscrossed the fields. Jack had grown up on a farm in Nebraska, and the sight of crops struggling against the elements always tugged at something deep in his chest. He understood the desperation of working the land, the constant battle against nature's indifference. As he rounded a gentle curve, something caught his eye in the distance. At first, it was just a dark speck against the endless tan of the desert floor. But as he drew closer, the speck resolved into human shapes. A woman stood at the edge of a cornfield, her silhouette wavering in the heat. Two small figures pressed close to her sides, their forms barely visible in the afternoon glare. Jack's first instinct was to keep driving. In his years on the road, he'd learned to be cautious about strangers, especially in isolated areas. Too many truckers had fallen victim to elaborate scams or worse, but something about the scene made him ease off the accelerator. The woman's posture spoke of exhaustion and desperation, not the calculated stance of someone looking to cause trouble. As he got closer, he could see that her clothes were dirty and torn, her hair matted with sweat and dust. The children clinging to her hands were barefoot, their faces flushed red from the sun. They looked like they'd been walking for hours, maybe days. The woman raised her head as his truck approached, and even from a distance, Jack could see the plea in her eyes. His conscience warred with his caution. Every survival instinct he'd developed over years of long-haul trucking told him to keep driving, to call the authorities from the next town and let them handle whatever situation these people were in. But something deeper, something that connected him to the scared kid he'd once been on his family's failing farm, made him press the brake pedal. The air brakes hissed as the massive truck came to a stop about 50 feet from where the woman stood. She didn't move toward the vehicle, didn't wave or call out. She simply stood there, protecting the children behind her, waiting to see what he would do. Jack sat in the cab for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel, knowing that whatever decision he made next would change everything. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and the whisper of wind through the dying corn. Jack studied the woman's face through the dusty windshield. She was probably in her 30s, with dark hair and the kind of tan that came from working outdoors. Her eyes held a mixture of hope and terror that made his chest tighten. The children were young, maybe 6 and 8 years old. They pressed against her legs like small animals seeking shelter, their wide eyes never leaving the truck. The older boy clutched a worn, stuffed animal, while the younger one sucked his thumb with the intensity of someone seeking comfort in a frightening world. Jack's hand hovered over the door handle. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Sometimes, son, you just gotta do what's right, even when it's hard." Earl Dawson had been a man of few words, but strong convictions. He'd taught Jack to help neighbors in need, to never turn away from someone in trouble. But Earl had never faced a situation like this. Alone on an empty highway with strangers whose story he didn't know. The woman took a tentative step forward, her movements careful and deliberate. She raised one hand in a gesture that was part greeting, part plea. Jack could see her lips moving, but couldn't hear the words through the thick glass of the cab. The desperation in her expression made his decision for him. With a deep breath, Jack opened the door and stepped down from the truck. The desert heat hit him like a physical blow, and he felt sweat immediately begin to bead on his forehead. The woman watched him approach, her body tense as a coiled spring. The children seemed to shrink further into her shadow. "Mom," Jack said, his voice rough from hours of silence. "You folks look like you could use some help." The woman's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse from thirst and exhaustion. "Please," she said, the single word carrying the weight of everything she couldn't say. "We need to get away from here. We need to go somewhere safe." Jack nodded, though questions buzzed in his mind like angry hornets. Where had they come from? What were they running from? Why were they alone in the middle of nowhere? But the immediate need was clear. These people were in trouble, and he was the only one who could help them. "Climb on up," he said, gesturing toward the truck. "I'll get you somewhere safe." As the woman lifted the children into the cab, Jack caught a glimpse of bruises on her arms, old enough to be yellowing but fresh enough to tell a story. The pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to solve began forming in his mind, but he pushed them aside. Right now, all that mattered was getting these people out of the desert heat and to safety. The woman settled the children in the sleeper compartment behind the seats, then climbed into the passenger seat. She moved like someone who expected to be hurt, flinching at sudden movements and keeping her body positioned protectively between Jack and the children. The wariness in her eyes spoke of experiences that had taught her to trust no one completely. As Jack climbed back into the driver's seat and started the engine, he realized that his quiet, predictable life had just taken a turn towards something he couldn't control or predict. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. Whatever these people were running from, whatever secrets they carried, he was now part of their story. The truck pulled back onto the highway, carrying its unusual cargo toward an uncertain future. In the rearview mirror, Jack watched the empty stretch of desert disappear behind them, taking with it the last traces of his old life. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The silence inside the truck cab was deafening. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror at the two children huddled in the sleeper compartment, their eyes wide and watchful. The woman sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap, staring straight ahead at the endless ribbon of highway. The only sounds were the rumble of the diesel engine and the whisper of air conditioning fighting against the desert heat. Jack had driven in silence with passengers before, but this felt different. This silence was heavy with secrets, thick with unspoken fears. He wanted to ask questions, needed to understand what he'd gotten himself into, but something about the woman's posture warned him to be careful. She looked like someone who had been pushed to her breaking point and was barely holding herself together. After 20 minutes of tense quiet, Jack cleared his throat. "Name's Jack Dawson," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "What should I call you folks?" The woman startled slightly, as if she'd forgotten he was there. She turned to look at him, and Jack caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in her eyes before she looked away again. "Sarah," she said quietly. "Sarah Miller. These are my boys, Tommy and Danny." Jack nodded, filing away the names, but something nagged at him. The way she'd hesitated before saying the names, the slight tremor in her voice. It reminded him of actors in those old westerns his father used to watch, trying to remember their lines. "How old are they?" he asked. "Tommy's 8, Danny's 6. Sarah replied, her voice steadier now. But when Jack glanced in the mirror, he saw the older boy's brow furrow slightly, as if he was confused by something. The younger boy just continued to stare out the window, his thumb firmly planted in his mouth. "Where are you folks headed?" Jack asked, genuinely curious. They were in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. How had they ended up walking along this desolate stretch of highway? Sarah's hands tightened in her lap. "Anywhere but here," she whispered. We just need to get away." The raw pain in her voice made Jack's chest tighten. He recognized that tone, had heard it in his own voice during the darkest period of his life, after his wife left and took their daughter with her. It was the sound of someone who had lost everything and was trying to hold on to the pieces. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" he asked carefully. "Someone after you?" Sarah's whole body went rigid. She turned to look at him, and for a moment, Jack thought she might tell him everything, but then she seemed to catch herself, and the walls went back up. "My husband," she said finally, he's not a good man. We had to leave." Jack nodded, understanding flooding through him. Domestic violence. It explained the bruises on her arms, the way she flinched at sudden movements, the desperation in her eyes. He'd seen it before, had even helped other women in similar situations. But something still felt off about her story, though he couldn't put his finger on what. "You got family somewhere you can go to?" he asked. "Friends?" Sarah shook her head. "Not really. We're pretty much on our own." The conversation lapsed back into silence, but Jack's mind was racing. He studied the woman beside him, noting details he'd missed before. Her clothes were dirty and torn, but they were good quality. Her shoes, though dusty, were expensive running shoes. Her hair was highlighted, the kind of professional color job that cost money. None of it fit with the image of a desperate woman fleeing an abusive husband. The children were equally puzzling. Despite being barefoot and sunburned, they were clean underneath the dirt. Their clothes were worn but well maintained. The older boy, Tommy, seemed unusually alert, his eyes constantly scanning the road ahead and behind them. It was the kind of hypervigilance Jack had seen in soldiers, not children. As they passed a rest stop, Jack noticed Sarah tense up. She slid lower in her seat and pulled the bill of a baseball cap down over her face. "Don't stop," she said urgently. "Please, just keep driving." Jack glanced at the rest stop as they passed. It was nearly empty, just a few cars and an RV. Nothing that should have caused such a reaction. But Sarah's fear was palpable, and it made him uncomfortable. What was she so afraid of? The miles rolled by, and Jack found himself stealing glances at his passengers. The younger boy, Danny, had fallen asleep against his brother's shoulder. But Tommy remained alert, watching the road with an intensity that seemed far too mature for his age. Every so often, he would whisper something to his brother, and Jack caught fragments. "Stay quiet," she said to be good. Almost there. The phrases struck Jack as odd. If Sarah was their mother, why would Tommy refer to her as she? And where exactly were they going? Sarah had said she didn't have any family or friends to help them. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold, Jack made a decision. He couldn't just drop these people off in some random town and drive away. Something was wrong here. Something that went deeper than a simple case of domestic violence. Whether Sarah was telling him the truth or not, those children needed help, and he was the only one in a position to provide it. "Listen," he said, breaking the silence. "I know a place where you can stay for a while. Get your feet under you. Figure out what to do next. It's safe, and the people there are good folks." Sarah turned to look at him. hope and suspicion warring in her expression. "What kind of place?" "An old friend of my dad's lives in Moriarty, Earl McKinley. He's got a big house, used to take in foster kids. He'd help you out. No questions asked." The hope in Sarah's eyes grew stronger, but Jack also saw something else. Relief, yes, but also a kind of calculation, as if she was weighing options he couldn't see. "How far is it?" she asked. "About 2 hours," Jack replied. "Adim, we'll be there before dark." Sarah nodded, then turned back to the window. But Jack caught her reflection in the side mirror, and what he saw made his blood run cold. For just a moment, her mask had slipped, and underneath the fear and desperation, he saw something that looked almost like triumph. The truck rolled on through the gathering dusk, carrying its mysterious cargo toward an uncertain destination. In the back of his mind, Jack wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life, but it was too late to turn back now. Whatever Sarah's story was, whatever secret she was hiding, they were all bound together now, hurtling toward a confrontation that none of them could avoid. The lights of Moriarty began to twinkle in the distance, promising answers to questions Jack wasn't sure he wanted to ask. The outskirts of Moriarty appeared like a mirage in the desert twilight. Modest homes and businesses scattered along the highway, like seeds dropped by a careless hand. Jack felt the familiar tug of approaching destination, but tonight it came with an undercurrent of anxiety he couldn't shake. Sarah had grown increasingly tense as they neared the town, her eyes darting between the side mirrors and the road ahead. "This Earl McKinley," she said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched for the past hour. "How well do you know him?" Jack considered the question. "Known him since I was a kid. He was my dad's best friend, stood up at his wedding. After Dad passed, Earl kinda looked out for me when I was getting started in trucking. He's solid, trustworthy." Sarah nodded, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the door handle. "Does he ask a lot of questions?" "Earl's not the prying type," Jack assured her. "He believes in helping folks first. Asking questions later, that's just who he is." As they drove deeper into town, Jack noticed how Sarah studied every intersection, every street sign, as if memorizing escape routes. The behavior struck him as odd for someone who claimed to be fleeing an abusive husband. Wouldn't she be relieved to be getting help? Instead, she seemed to be calculating, planning. The children in the back had been unusually quiet during the drive. Tommy continued his vigilant watch out the windows, while Danny dozed fitfully against his brother's shoulder. But as they slowed for a traffic light, Jack heard Tommy whisper something that made his blood run cold. "Remember what she told us. Don't say anything about before." "Before what?" Jack wanted to ask, but Sarah's sharp intake of breath told him she'd heard it too. She turned in her seat to look at the boys, and Jack caught a glimpse of her expression in the rear-view mirror. It wasn't the gentle concern of a mother. It was something harder, more controlling. "Boys," she said quietly, "remember what we talked about. We're safe now, but we need to be careful what we say. Some things are better kept private." Tommy nodded solemnly, his young face serious beyond his years. Danny stirred awake and looked around with confusion before his brother shushed him gently. The whole exchange felt rehearsed, like they'd had this conversation before. Earl McKinley's house sat on a tree-lined street on the older side of town, a modest two-story with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that his late wife had planted years ago. Jack pulled into the gravel driveway, the truck's air brakes hissing as he brought it to a stop. The house looked warm and welcoming in the gathering darkness, lights glowing in the windows like beacon fires. "Sid, this is it," Jack said, turning off the engine. "Earl's good people. He'll help you get back on your feet." Sarah stared at the house for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to the children. "Stay close to me," she instructed. "Don't wander off, and remember what we talked about." They climbed out of the truck, and Jack led them up the front walk. The porch light flickered on as they approached, and the front door opened before Jack could knock. Earl McKinley stood framed in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. At 73, he was still tall and straight, his silver hair neatly combed and his flannel shirt pressed despite the late hour. "Jack," he said warmly. Then his eyes moved to the woman and children. "Looks like you've brought company." "Earl, this is Sarah Miller and her boys, Tommy and Danny," Jack said. "They're in a bit of trouble. Need a safe place to stay for a while." Earl's expression softened immediately. "Well, come on in then. No need to stand out here in the night air." He stepped aside, gesturing them into the house. The interior was exactly as Jack remembered from his childhood visits. Comfortable furniture, family photos on the mantel, and the lingering scent of coffee and homemade bread. Earl had always been a good cook, a skill he developed after his wife passed away 5 years ago. "You folks hungry?" Earl asked, already heading toward the kitchen. "I've got some stew on the stove, plenty to go around." "That's very kind of you," Sarah said, her voice carefully polite. "We don't want to impose." "No imposition at all," Earl replied. "Jack's family affair, which makes you family too. Besides, this old house gets too quiet sometimes. Nice to have young voices around." As Earl bustled about preparing bowls of stew, Jack found himself studying Sarah more carefully. She moved through the house like someone casing it, noting the exits, the sightlines, the places where someone could hide or watch. Her eyes lingered on the phone, mounted on the kitchen wall, and Jack saw her mentally catalogue its location. The children sat at Earl's kitchen table, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. Tommy seemed to relax slightly in the warm, homey atmosphere, but he still maintained his watchful alertness. Danny, however, appeared more confused than relieved, as if he didn't understand why they were there. "This is nice," Danny said suddenly, his young voice cutting through the adult conversation. "It reminds me of Grandma's house." Sarah went rigid. "Danny, eat your stew," she said sharply. "But it does look like Grandma's house," the boy persisted. "And the one with the yellow kitchen and the—" "Danny," Sarah's voice carried a warning that made the child shrink back. "I said, eat your stew." Earl glanced between them, his expression thoughtful. "How old did you say the boys were, Sarah?" "Tommy's 8, Danny's 6, she replied without hesitation. Earl nodded slowly. "Danny, you're a bright boy. First grade or kindergarten?" "Second grade," Danny said proudly. "I can read chapter books and everything. Miss Johnson says I'm really smart for my age." "That's wonderful," Earl said, but Jack noticed his eyes narrow slightly. If Danny was 6 and in second grade, he was either exceptionally advanced or older than Sarah claimed. The meal continued with stilted conversation, Sarah deflecting Earl's gentle questions about their background and their plans. She spoke in generalities, painting a picture of an abusive husband and a desperate flight to safety. It was a story that should have evoked sympathy, but something about the way she told it felt rehearsed, like lines learned from a script. After dinner, Earl showed them to the guest rooms upstairs. "The boys can share the room at the end of the hall," he said. "Sarah, you can have the room next door. Bathroom's right here in the middle." "Thank you," Sarah said. "You're very kind." As they settled in for the night, Jack found himself alone with Earl in the kitchen. The older man was washing dishes, his movements methodical and thoughtful. "Something's not right about this, Jack," Earl said quietly. "That woman's story doesn't add up." Jack nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing, but those kids need help, regardless of whatever game she's playing." "Agreed," Earl said, "but we need to be careful. I've seen enough troubled families over the years to know when someone's lying. The question is, what's she lying about?" As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of footsteps on the stairs made them both turn. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her hair damp from washing and her face scrubbed clean. Without the dirt and grime of the road, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but also somehow more dangerous. "The boys are asleep," she said. Iggy, I wanted to thank you both again for your kindness. I know this is a lot to ask of strangers. Think nothing of it, Earl said. We're all just trying to help each other get through this life. Sarah nodded, but Jack noticed she avoided making eye contact with either of them. I should get some rest too. It's been a long day. After she disappeared back upstairs, Earl turned to Jack with a troubled expression. Now I'm going to make some calls tomorrow, he said quietly. Check with some people I know, see if there's anything we should know about. Jack nodded, though part of him wondered if they were already in too deep to turn back. Whatever Sarah's secrets were, they were all entangled in them now, bound together by circumstance and the choices they'd made. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of storms on the horizon. Dawn broke grey and overcast, with heavy clouds gathering on the horizon like an ominous promise. Jack had barely slept, his mind churning with questions and doubts about the woman and children he'd brought into Earl's home. He'd risen early and was sitting on the front porch with a cup of coffee when Earl emerged from the house, his face grave. Couldn't sleep either, Earl asked, settling into the chair beside Jack. Been thinking all night, Jack admitted. Something about that Danny boy really bothers me. Did you notice how he talked about his grandmother's house and the way Sarah shut him down? Earl nodded slowly. I've been fostering kids for over 20 years, Jack. I know when a child is confused about their own story. That boy doesn't understand what he's supposed to say and what he's not. Before Jack could respond, the front door opened and Sarah stepped onto the porch. She'd changed into clean clothes that Earl had provided, and her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked almost normal, like any suburban mother starting her day. But there was still that underlying tension in her posture. Good morning, she said cautiously. I hope we didn't disturb you. The boys are still sleeping. Not at all, Earl replied warmly. Coffee? That would be wonderful, thank you. As Earl went inside to fetch another cup, Sarah settled into the swing at the far end of the porch. Jack noticed how she positioned herself where she could see both the street and the front door, always maintaining escape routes. How are you feeling this morning? Jack asked. Better, Sarah said, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. It's nice to feel safe for once. Earl returned with coffee and settled back into his chair. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what are your plans? Do you have somewhere you're trying to get to? Sarah's hands tightened around the coffee mug. I'm not sure yet. We just needed to get away from him. I haven't thought much beyond that. What kind of work do you do? Earl continued gently. Might help us figure out where you could start over. I used to work in an office, Sarah said vaguely. Administrative stuff, nothing special. Jack frowned. Her hands didn't look like those of someone who did office work. They were soft but strong, with calluses in odd places and perfectly manicured nails that had been recently done. The pieces didn't fit together. The sound of children's voices drifted from inside the house, and Sarah immediately tensed. I should check on them, she said, rising quickly. Let them play, Earl suggested. Kids need to be kids. They're probably just exploring the house. But Sarah was already moving toward the door, her maternal instincts apparently overriding Earl's gentle suggestion. Jack and Earl exchanged glances, both noting how quickly she'd moved to control the situation. Inside, they found Tommy and Danny in the living room, looking at Earl's collection of family photos on the mantel. Danny was pointing excitedly at a picture of Earl's late wife in her garden. Look, Tommy, she has the same flowers as Mama Eleanor used to grow, Danny exclaimed. Sarah went pale. Danny, come away from there. We shouldn't touch Mr. McKinley's things. Mama Eleanor? Earl asked quietly. Who's Mama Eleanor, Danny? The little boy looked confused, glancing between Sarah and Earl. She's the lady who took care of us before we came here. She had a garden just like this one, with yellow flowers and... Danny, that's enough, Sarah said sharply. Go upstairs and get dressed, both of you." The boys obeyed immediately, but Jack caught the look of confusion in Tommy's eyes. The older boy seemed to understand that something was wrong, but couldn't quite grasp what. After the children disappeared upstairs, Earl turned to Sarah with a concerned expression. "Sarah, I think we need to talk." "About what?" she asked, but her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "About who those boys really are," Earl said gently. "Because I don't think they're your sons." Sarah's coffee mug slipped from her hands, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound seemed to echo through the house like a gunshot. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered. "Danny talks about his grandmother's house, about someone named Mama Elena, about things that don't fit with being your child," Earl continued. "And Tommy watches you like he's waiting for instructions, not like a son looks at his mother." Jack felt his stomach drop. "Sarah, what's going on? Who are these kids?" For a moment, Sarah looked like she might bolt. Her eyes darted toward the stairs, toward the front door, calculating distances and possibilities. Then something seemed to break inside her, and she sank onto the couch with her head in her hands. "They're not mine," she whispered. "They're not my children." The admission hung in the air like a physical presence. Jack felt the world shift beneath his feet, all his assumptions crumbling like sand castles. "Then whose children are they?" Earl asked, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. Sarah looked up, tears streaming down her face. "They belong to a family called the Hendersons, Maria and Carlos Henderson. They live in Phoenix." "And how did you end up with them?" Jack asked, though he was afraid of the answer. "Maria is my sister," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "She's in the hospital, has been for 3 weeks. She was in a car accident, and the doctors don't know if she'll wake up. Carlos is there with her around the clock, and there was no one else to take care of Tommy and Danny." Jack felt a mixture of relief and confusion. "So you're their aunt? Why didn't you just say that?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "Because I'm not supposed to have them. Child Services was going to put them in foster care, separate them. Maria made me promise before she went into surgery that I wouldn't let that happen. She made me promise to keep them together." "So you took them?" Earl asked. "I took them," Sarah confirmed. 3 days ago, I was supposed to be their temporary guardian, but the paperwork got mixed up. And when Child Services came to check on them, they had a court order to remove them from my care. They said I wasn't qualified, that I had issues in my background that made me unsuitable." "What kind of issues?" Jack asked quietly. Sarah's face crumpled. "I made some mistakes when I was younger, got involved with the wrong people, had some legal troubles, nothing violent, just bad choices. But it's enough that they won't let me care for my sister's children." The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Jack still felt like he was missing something crucial. "So you ran." "I couldn't let them separate Tommy and Danny," Sarah said desperately. "They've been through so much already, losing their parents like this. Tommy has nightmares every night, and Danny still doesn't really understand why Mama and Papa aren't coming home. I couldn't let strangers take them to different homes where they might never see each other again." Earl leaned forward. "Sarah, running away with children who aren't legally in your custody is kidnapping, even if your intentions are good." "I know that," Sarah snapped, then immediately softened. "I know what I did was wrong legally, but morally, how could I let them destroy what's left of those boys' world?" Jack found himself torn between admiration for her devotion to the children and horror at the situation they were all now in. "What were you planning to do?" "You can't keep running forever." "I was hoping to get to my aunt in Colorado," Sarah said. "She's older, more stable. Maybe she could petition for custody, or at least take care of them until Maria wakes up." "And if Maria doesn't wake up?" Earl asked gently. Sarah's face crumpled completely. "Then at least they'll be together. At least they'll be with family who loves them." Footsteps on the stairs announced the children's return. They appeared in the doorway. dressed and ready for the day, but their expressions were subdued. Tommy, in particular, seemed to sense the tension in the room. "Are we in trouble?" he asked quietly. Sarah wiped her eyes and tried to smile. "No, sweetheart, we're just talking about what comes next." "Are we going to see Mama and Papa soon?" Danny asked hopefully. Sarah's breath caught, and Jack saw her struggle to find words that were honest but not heartbreaking. "We're working on it, baby. We're working on it." As Jack looked at the two children, so young and caught in circumstances beyond their control, he realized that whatever happened next, their lives had all become irrevocably intertwined. The simple act of stopping for strangers on a desert highway had led them all into a moral maze with no clear path forward. Outside, the storm clouds continued to gather, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm was just beginning. The afternoon sun struggled through the gathering storm clouds as Jack sat alone on Earl's back porch, watching Tommy and Danny play in the yard. The boys had found an old tire swing hanging from the massive oak tree, and for the first time since he'd met them, they actually looked like children. Their laughter carried on the wind, a sound both beautiful and heartbreaking given everything he now knew about their situation. Sarah had retreated to her room after her confession, claiming she needed time to think. Earl was inside making phone calls, trying to reach contacts who might be able to help navigate the legal minefield they'd stumbled into. Jack felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. He'd thought he was helping a woman escape an abusive husband. Instead, he'd become an accessory to what the law would consider kidnapping. The back door creaked open, and Earl stepped onto the porch, his face grim. "I talked to my friend Margaret at Child Protective Services," he said, settling into the chair beside Jack. "She gave me some unofficial information about the Henderson case." Jack turned to look at him. "What did she say?" "Maria Henderson has been in a coma for 3 weeks, just like Sarah said. Carlos barely leaves her side. But here's the thing. Sarah wasn't just denied custody because of her past legal troubles. There's more to it." "What kind of more?" Earl was quiet for a moment, watching the children play. 5 years ago, Sarah was involved in a situation with another family. She was working as a nanny for a wealthy couple in Scottsdale. When they went through a messy divorce, Sarah allegedly tried to influence the custody battle by making false accusations against the father. Jack felt his blood run cold. What happened? The accusations were proven false, but not before they destroyed the man's reputation and career. Sarah lost her job, faced charges for filing false reports, and was banned from working with children in any professional capacity. The couple's marriage was destroyed, and their children were traumatized by the whole ordeal. The laughter from the yard suddenly seemed more distant. So when Child Services saw her name on the temporary custody paperwork, they moved fast. Earl finished. They couldn't take the chance that she might manipulate these children the same way she tried to manipulate that situation 5 years ago. Jack rubbed his face with his hands. "But that doesn't mean she's wrong about keeping the boys together. Foster care can be brutal, especially when siblings get separated." "I know," Earl said quietly. "That's what makes this so complicated. Sarah's motives might be pure, but her methods are questionable. And her history suggests a pattern of using children to achieve her own ends." Before Jack could respond, Tommy appeared at the bottom of the porch steps. The 8-year-old's face was serious, older than his years. "Mr. Jack, can I ask you something?" "Of course, buddy. What's on your mind?" Tommy climbed the steps and sat cross-legged on the porch floor. "Are we going to see Mama and Papa soon? Sarah keeps saying we will, but it's been a really long time." Jack exchanged glances with Earl. The boy deserved honesty, but how much could an 8-year-old handle? "Tommy, do you understand what happened to your parents?" Papa said Mama got hurt in a car accident. Tommy said matter-of-factly. She's sleeping in the hospital and the doctors are trying to wake her up. But sometimes people don't wake up, do they? The simple question hit Jack like a punch to the gut. Sometimes they don't, he admitted. But the doctors are doing everything they can to help your mama. Tommy nodded solemnly. Sarah told us we couldn't go back to our house because some people wanted to separate me and Danny. She said they would put us in different families and we might never see each other again. How do you feel about that? Earl asked gently. Scared, Tommy admitted. Danny's my little brother. I'm supposed to take care of him. If we get separated, who will help him with his nightmares? Who will make sure he eats his vegetables? The weight of the boy's words settled over the porch like a heavy blanket. Here was a child trying to be the adult in an impossible situation, carrying responsibilities that no 8-year-old should have to bear. Tommy, Jack said carefully, what do you think about Sarah? Do you trust her? The boy considered this for a long moment. She's not Mama, he said finally. She tries to be nice, but she's always watching us, like she's waiting for us to do something wrong. And sometimes she tells us things that don't match what we remember. What kind of things? Like our names, Tommy said quietly. She keeps calling Danny Danny, but his real name is Daniel Miguel. And she called me Thomas yesterday, but my name is Tomas with an accent mark. Papa always said the accent was important because it honors our grandfather. Earl leaned forward. Has Sarah ever told you not to mention certain things to other people? Tommy nodded. She said not to talk about Mama Elena or about our house or about school. She said it might confuse people and they might not understand our situation. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Sarah was coaching the children, shaping their narrative to fit her story. But was she protecting them or manipulating them? The back door opened again and Sarah stepped onto the porch. She smiled when she saw Tommy, but Jack noticed the tightness around her eyes. There you are, sweetheart. I was looking for you. I was just talking to Mr. Jack and Mr. Earl, Tommy said innocently. That's nice, Sarah said, though her smile became more strained. Why don't you go find Danny? It looks like it might rain soon, and we should probably head inside. Tommy obediently ran off to collect his brother, but Jack noticed how he glanced back at them with an expression that seemed far too knowing for a child his age. Once the boy was out of earshot, Sarah turned to Jack and Earl. I know what you're thinking, she said. I know how this looks. Do you? Earl asked quietly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're using those children's fear of separation to justify taking them away from the people who are legally responsible for their care. Sarah's composure cracked slightly. Those people don't know Tommy and Danny. They don't know that Danny still wets the bed when he's scared, or that Tommy has panic attacks when he can't find his brother. They don't know that Maria used to sing them to sleep in Spanish, or that Carlos taught them to play chess on Sunday mornings. But you do, Jack asked. Yes, I do, Sarah said fiercely, because I've been part of their lives since they were born. I'm not some stranger who swooped in and took them. I'm family. Family who has a history of manipulating custody situations, Earl said bluntly. Sarah went white. You looked into my background. We had to, Jack said. Too much about your story didn't add up. For a moment, Sarah looked like she might deny everything. Then her shoulders sagged in defeat. That situation in Scottsdale was different. I was young and stupid, and I got involved with people who convinced me that I was helping. I made terrible choices, and I've regretted them every day since. But you made similar choices here, Earl pointed out. You took children who weren't legally yours, coached them on what to say, and ran across state lines. Because I love them, Sarah exploded, because they're all I have left of my sister, and I can't let them disappear into a system that will chew them up and spit them out. The raw pain in her voice was undeniable, but Jack found himself wondering if love was enough to justify what she'd done. He thought about his own daughter living with her mother in California and how he'd felt when the divorce settlement limited his visitation rights. The desperation to maintain connection with a child you love could drive people to extreme measures. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The boys ran toward the house, laughing and squealing as they dodged the droplets. In that moment, they looked so normal, so happy, that Jack almost forgot the complexity of their situation. But as they reached the porch, he saw Tommy's expression change. The boy was looking at Sarah with a mixture of affection and wariness that broke Jack's heart. These children were caught between love and law, between family and the system designed to protect them. And somehow, Jack realized he'd become responsible for helping decide their fate. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke just after sunset, sending sheets of rain against the windows and turning the quiet street into a river of rushing water. Inside Earl's house, the atmosphere was equally turbulent. Sarah paced the living room like a caged animal, while Jack and Earl sat at the kitchen table, trying to figure out their next move. The children were upstairs, supposedly getting ready for bed, but Jack could hear their whispered conversations through the ceiling. They knew something was wrong, could sense the tension that filled the house like electricity before lightning strikes. "We have to call the authorities," Earl said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "Those boys need to be with people who can legally care for them." "And what happens then?" Sarah demanded from the doorway. She'd been listening to their conversation, her eyes red from crying, but her jaw set with determination. "They get split up, sent to strangers who don't know the first thing about them." Jack looked up at her. "Sarah, you can't keep running. This isn't sustainable, and it's not fair to Tommy and Danny." "Fair?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "You want to know what's not fair? My sister lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life, while bureaucrats decide the fate of her children based on paperwork and protocols, instead of what's actually best for them." Earl's phone rang, cutting through the tension. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "It's Margaret from Child Services," he said. "I asked her to look into some things." Sarah went pale. "You called them?" "I called a friend," Earl corrected gently. "Someone who might be able to help us find a solution that works for everyone." He answered the phone, stepping into the next room for privacy. Jack could hear the murmur of conversation, but couldn't make out the words. Sarah sank into a chair, her bravado finally cracking completely. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. "I just wanted to buy some time, find someone who could take better care of them than strangers." "What about their father?" Jack asked. "Carlos? Couldn't he take care of them?" Sarah shook her head. "Carlos is falling apart. He hasn't left Maria's side in 3 weeks. He's not eating, barely sleeping. The doctors are worried about him too. And even if he could take care of them, he has no legal status as their guardian. Maria and Carlos never married officially. They're common law, but that doesn't give him any rights in the eyes of the court." Jack felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Every angle seemed to lead to heartbreak for someone. "What about that aunt in Colorado you mentioned?" "Aunt Rosa," Sarah said with a sad smile. "She's 78 years old and lives in a retirement community. She loves the boys, but she can't take care of 2 active children at her age." Earl returned from his phone call, his expression troubled. "Margaret gave me some news, good and bad." "Tell us," Jack said. "The good news is that Maria's condition has improved slightly. She's shown some brain activity in the past few days, and the doctors think she might be starting to wake up." Sarah's face lit up with hope. "Really? She's getting better?" "It's possible," Earl said carefully. "But it could still take weeks or months before she's fully conscious. And even then, there might be lasting effects from her injuries." "What's the bad news?" Jack asked, though he suspected he already knew. "An Amber Alert was issued this morning. Tommy and Danny are officially listed as missing children, and Sarah is wanted for custodial interference. Every law enforcement agency in the Southwest is looking for them. The room fell silent, except for the sound of rain beating against the windows. Sarah buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "How long before they trace them here?" Jack asked. "Not long," Earl admitted. "I told Margaret I might have some information about the case, but I didn't give her specifics. She'll expect me to call back with details." Footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of Tommy and Danny, both in pajamas that Earl had found for them. Tommy was holding his little brother's hand, his face serious and watchful. "Why is everyone so sad?" Danny asked, his young voice cutting through the adult tension. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and tried to smile. "We're not sad, sweetheart. We're just tired." But Tommy wasn't fooled. He studied the adults with those wise 8-year-old eyes, taking in their expressions and body language. "Are the people coming to take us away?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jack found himself looking at this brave little boy who was trying so hard to protect his younger brother, and something shifted inside him. "Tommy," Jack said, kneeling down to the boy's level, "what do you want to happen? If you could choose, or what would make you and Danny happy?" Tommy considered this seriously. "I want Mama to wake up and come home. I want Papa to stop crying. I want things to be like they were before." "But if that can't happen right away," Jack pressed gently, "what then?" "I want to stay with Danny," Tommy said without hesitation. "I don't care where we go or who takes care of us, as long as we're together." Danny nodded vigorously. "Tommy takes care of me when I have bad dreams. He knows how to make my favorite sandwich." Jack looked up at Earl and Sarah, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. These children had been through enough trauma. Whatever else happened, they needed stability and security. "Sarah," Earl said quietly, "I have an idea, but it would require you to trust the system you've been running from." Sarah looked up, and hope and fear warring in her expression. What kind of idea?" "Margaret mentioned that there's been a recent change in state policy about keeping siblings together in foster care. If we can prove that separation would be harmful to the children's emotional well-being, and if we can find a qualified foster family willing to take them both temporarily, the court might be willing to consider alternative arrangements." "But that still means strangers," Sarah protested. Earl held up a hand. "Not necessarily. I still have my foster care license. It's current, and I've had excellent evaluations for 20 years. If I petition to take temporary custody of both boys while their mother recovers, and if you agreed to supervised visitation as their aunt, it might be a solution everyone could live with." Jack felt a spark of hope. Would that work? Legally? "It's possible," Earl said, "especially if Sarah voluntarily surrenders custody and cooperates with the investigation. It would show that her primary concern really was the children's welfare, not some other motive." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking at Tommy and Danny. The boys watched her with trust and expectation, waiting for the adults to figure out their fate. "They would still be together?" she asked finally. "They would still be together," Earl confirmed. "And you could see them regularly. More importantly, they'd be in a stable environment while we wait to see what happens with Maria." "And if Mama wakes up?" Tommy asked, having followed the conversation with remarkable understanding. "Then you go home to your family where you belong," Earl said with a gentle smile. Jack watched Sarah wrestle with the decision. It meant giving up control, trusting strangers, admitting that she'd made mistakes. But it also meant the boys would be safe and together. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's call your friend Margaret." As Earl reached for the phone, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Maybe there was a way through this maze after all. Maybe love and law didn't have to be enemies. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside Earl's warm house, the first fragile beginnings of a solution were taking shape. 3 weeks later, Jack pulled his truck into the familiar driveway of Earl's house. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Sunlight streamed through the trees, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air. Tommy and Danny were in the front yard, playing catch with a worn baseball that Earl had found in his garage. The sight of them running and playing like normal children brought a smile to Jack's face. The legal proceedings had been surprisingly smooth. Thanks to Earl's reputation in the community and Margaret's advocacy within the system, Sarah had voluntarily surrendered custody and was cooperating fully with all requirements. More importantly, she was attending counseling sessions to address the trauma and poor decision-making that had led to this crisis. "Mr. Jack," Danny called out, running toward the truck with his arms outstretched. "You're back." Jack caught the 6-year-old in a bear hug, marveling at how much more relaxed and happy the boy seemed. "Hey there, buddy. How are you doing?" "Great. Mr. Earl taught me how to ride a bike, and tomorrow we're going to visit Sarah at the hospital where she works now." Jack raised an eyebrow. Sarah had found work at the same medical facility where Maria was being treated, allowing her to be close to her sister while rebuilding her life in a constructive way. Tommy approached more cautiously, as was his nature, but his smile was genuine. "Hi, Mr. Jack. Did you bring us anything from the road?" Jack reached into his cab and pulled out 2 small packages. "As a matter of fact, I did." He handed each boy a toy truck, watching their faces light up with delight. Earl emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a dish towel. At 73, he seemed to have found a new lease on life with the boys in his care. "Jack, perfect timing. I was just making lunch." As they walked toward the house, Tommy tugged on Jack's sleeve. "Mr. Jack, we have news. Really big news." "Oh yeah, what's that?" "Mama woke up." Danny burst out, unable to contain his excitement any longer. "Yesterday, Sarah called us from the hospital and we got to talk to Mama on the phone." Jack felt his heart leap. "That's incredible. How is she?" "She's still really tired," Tommy explained with his characteristic seriousness, "and she has to do exercises to help her remember things and move her arms better. But she knew our voices right away, and she cried happy tears." Earl nodded, his own eyes bright with emotion. "The doctors say her recovery is remarkable. She's got a long road ahead, but her cognitive function is intact, and her motor skills are improving daily." As they settled around the kitchen table for lunch, Jack marveled at how normal this felt. The boys chatted about school, friends they'd made, and their weekend plans. Earl had enrolled them in the local elementary school, where they were thriving under the stability of a routine and the security of knowing they wouldn't be separated. "How's Carlos handling everything?" Jack asked. "Better," Earl replied. "And knowing that the boys are safe and that Maria is recovering has taken a huge weight off his shoulders. He's been able to sleep and eat properly for the first time in weeks. He calls every evening to talk to Tommy and Danny. And Sarah, she's doing well," Tommy piped up. "She says she's learning to make better choices. And guess what? She's going to school to become a real nurse so she can help people like Mama." Jack smiled at the boys' innocent summary of what was probably a complex rehabilitation process. But it seemed that Sarah was genuinely committed to rebuilding her life and proving that she could be a positive force in the children's lives. After lunch, while the boys went outside to play, Jack and Earl sat on the front porch with coffee. The desert heat had given way to the pleasant warmth of autumn, and the cottonwood trees were beginning to turn gold. "So what's the long-term plan?" Jack asked. Earl was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy teach Danny how to properly throw a curveball. "Maria should be ready to come home in another month or 2. Carlos has been working with social services to establish his parental rights officially. Once that's sorted out, and once Maria is physically able, the boys will go home where they belong. And until then, we take it one day at a time, Earl said with a contented smile. Those boys have brought more joy into this old house than I've felt since Margaret passed away. It's reminded me that there's still good work to be done in this world. Jack nodded, understanding completely. His own life had been changed by the encounter on that desert highway. He'd started volunteering with a local organization that helped families in crisis, using his trucking connections to transport supplies and sometimes people to safety. There's something else, Earl said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Something I haven't told you yet. Jack looked at him curiously. What's that? Last week, Maria asked to speak with me privately. She wanted to thank me for taking care of her boys. But she also wanted to ask me something. What kind of something? Earl's eyes twinkled with mischief. She asked if I'd consider being their official godfather. Not legally, but in the family sense. She said that anyone who would open their home to children in need, who would love them like their own, deserved to be part of their family permanently. Jack felt his throat tighten with emotion. Now, what did you tell her? I told her I'd be honored, Earl said simply. Those boys have given me a purpose I thought I'd lost when Margaret died, and they've reminded me that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up when people need you most. As if summoned by their conversation, Tommy and Danny came running toward the porch, their faces flushed with excitement and exertion. Mr. Earl, Mr. Jack, Tommy called out. And we have an idea. What's your idea? Earl asked, pulling Danny onto his lap. We want to have a party, Danny announced, for when Mama comes home, with cake and balloons and everything. And we want everyone to be there, Tommy added. Mama and Papa and Sarah and you and Mr. Jack, like a real family party. Jack exchanged glances with Earl, both men recognizing the profound wisdom in a child's simple desire to bring together all the people who had loved and protected them through this crisis. I think that sounds like a wonderful idea, Jack said. The best idea I've heard in a long time. As the afternoon sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jack realized that what had started as a simple act of compassion on a lonely highway had grown into something much larger. It had become a story about the different forms that family could take, about the courage required to do the right thing, even when it was difficult, and about the way that love could triumph over circumstances that seemed impossible to overcome. The boys ran back into the yard, their voices carrying on the evening breeze as they planned their reunion party. Earl rocked gently in his chair, a peaceful expression on his weathered face, and Jack sat quietly, grateful for the reminder that sometimes the most important journeys in life weren't measured in miles, but in the connections we made and the lives we touched along the way. 3 months later, Jack stood in Earl's backyard, watching as Maria Henderson, walking slowly but steadily with the help of a cane, was surrounded by her sons, her husband, and the extended family that had formed around them during their darkest hour. Sarah was there too, laughing as Danny showed her the flower garden he'd helped Earl plant. The circle was complete, but it was also bigger than any of them had imagined it could be. As Jack prepared to leave for his next delivery, Tommy ran up to him with a handmade card. "This is for you," the boy said seriously, "so you remember us when you're on the road." Jack opened the card to find a drawing of a truck on a highway, with stick figures of a man, a woman, and 2 children standing beside it. At the bottom, in careful 8-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for stopping. End of history." Dear listeners, we hope that Jack, Sarah, Tommy, and Danny's story has moved you as much as it moved us. Sometimes the most profound changes in our lives begin with a simple choice to help someone in need. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about the power of human kindness and the different forms that family can take. You can find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of life, love, and the choices that define us. Don't miss our upcoming content. And we look forward to seeing you in the comments, sharing your own thoughts about the power of compassion and the true meaning of family.